Global Business Update, Michael Wilson joins us now from London. Great to have you, Michael.
Good morning. Yeah, it's another day of catch-up, really, as far as the Asian Pacific markets are concerned, after the confusion, which is not being helped, of course, by the UK so-called mini budget, and also Wall Street, another sell-off we saw yesterday. So the Nikkei down about 2%, Shanghai Composite down about 0.25%. But there's some news coming out of China right now, which I'm not exactly sure about, but it looks like they're relaxing their informal foreign exchange trading limits. Apparently, they have a sort of virtual window that opens, and on a nod and a wink, you can actually get slightly more of their currency. That's helping the renminbi, the yuan, to actually fall very, very slightly. But again, it just shows a gradual loosening, I think, of monetary policy in China. Let's shift our attention to SoftBank. And we've been talking, haven't we, over the past few days about its attitude towards its big sort of risky investment arm, Vision Fund. Well, apparently it's planning 30% staff cuts to that. The SoftBank founder, Mr. Son, was saying earlier that he wants to be more systematic with investments. It is a fund which was created to take big ups and big downs and so on, hence investments in things like Uber and WeWork and so on, which have tested it to its limits, but is apparently promising a slightly more systematic approach to investment in the future. Let's turn our attention to the United States. Stock futures inch lower, actually, after that broad sell-off yesterday. Dow futures lost about 106 points. NASDAQ down about 0.26. And this sell-off really just resumed. And also, we did get the jobless figures yesterday. I talked about this yesterday on the Global Business Report, but we've got some news out of the Fed now overnight that two of the hawks there, the Fed, Loretta Mester, who's from Cleveland, and the usual James Bullard is also somebody who is known as a Fed hawk. He's been saying that that both of them are not worried. They don't care about whether the US is in recession or not. They still feel as though they're going to increase interest rates, because that's what you get. That's what they want to avoid in a tight labour market, which fuels inflation. Again, it's a risky course, but then again, everybody's on a risky course right now. Anyway, there we are, two hawks from the Fed speaking. Apple was downgraded yesterday. People are not convinced that the new 14 series iPhone is going to is going to get the kind of demand that the company would actually like. It may happen, it may not, who knows. But Alphabet and Microsoft to 1-year lows as well. So basically tech stocks were actually hit yesterday. And I honestly think it is about Apple, and it is about Microsoft, and it is about the rest of them. But also they've been pushed down all year because investors are more and more going to more defensive stocks rather than techs, because they're worried about the effect of high interest rates and the fact that will have on consumer demand. Let's turn our attention to the United Kingdom, and still going through the ramifications of that so-called mini budget. Much more pressure on Kwarteng, there he is, and also on Liz Truss, whom we just saw, to publish the forecasts for what actually is going on, not on November the 23rd, but at least by the end of October. It's very unusual for a budget to be presented without the Office for Budget Responsibility, which is supposed to be an independent observer actually doing the sums for the markets. What everybody's saying to them both is, for heaven's sake, let's have some hard data about what your plans actually involve. And this is something which gradually, I think this is going to be the story over the weekend. It's no doubt something we'll be talking about on Monday. I would just cast your minds back, those of you, I know that you two have relatively long memories about this, but do you remember James Carville, who was Bill Clinton's economic advisor, the raging Cajun, as he was taught then? And what did he say? Do you remember this? You probably do. They said to him, so if you were daydreaming, what would you like to be reincarnated as? And he said, I want to be a bond trader, because everybody is scared of bond traders. And sure enough, the dull old bond markets are now beginning to change economic history, and I think we're going to see that over the weekend. I'll come on to that later on if you want to talk about it. James Carville, the raging Cajun, it's the economy stupid. Do you remember all that? Of course you do. Yeah. Cost of living in the UK, energy prices are set to rise tomorrow. Yes, there will be some kind of relief from them. A typical bill will rise to £2,500 from 1971. It'll be slightly mitigated by the help that the government's going to give, but it won't help the poorer parts of the economy, which actually depend upon prepayment. And yesterday we reported on H&M, the second largest clothing retailer in the world, Swedish company, losing 85% on its share price because of its withdrawal from Russia. Well, Next is a significant retailer headed by the indefatigable Sir Simon Wolfson, who knows a thing or two about economics, and he's saying, and Next is saying, that the weaker pound, which has been brought about by the mini budget, will probably add to clothing costs, and their forecasts are probably quite healthy as far as they're going, as far as retailing is concerned, but it's clear that retailing is going to have to change its game. And finally, I'll just talk about oil very, very briefly. We always talk about oil. Again, I can't add any more detail to this. It's basically very volatile at the moment, as you probably imagine, and we're waiting for OPEC meeting. I think it's October the 5th and 6th. So we're waiting for that next week to actually tell us which way the oil market's going to go. That's the global view.
All right. The very first thing, Michael, number one is, please let's not act like all of this didn't cost something, because a lot of people are now arguing this morning in the UK that, yeah, the pound to the dollar is now 1.12 again. You know, things are beginning to calm down. It came at a cost. That cost is 65 billion pounds sterling. Question is, should we write Kwesi Kwarteng and Liz Truss an invoice for that cost? And secondly, how will they go ahead and pass a mini budget without going through the OBR? You know, that's something that if 6-year-olds do, they should be punished. How would you even do that in the first place? Going to pass a mini budget at the time of a crisis, do your monkey business without going through the OBR, and now you're pushing the can down the road by telling us on the 25th you will give us a fiscal framework of November? Who does that? Who is this reckless?
You were talking about 6-year-olds. I can remember at school when they said, you know, when you did your maths, which I was particularly not very good at, but there we are, so that's a different story. But it said, actually, show your workings, show how you got to the answer.
Simple.
That's what the OBR should be doing. That's what politicians should be doing. They say, okay, that's what you're going to do. Now, all we want to see is the workings. How do you actually get there? Now, this is, as you say, this is what 6-year-olds do at school, don't they? They show, like long division, for example. You remember that? I was talking about this with a neighbour the other day, and his children just pick answers and say, it's that one and that one. What we had to do when we were at school was to show the workings of it on a piece of paper, how you actually got to the answer. That's all that's being required by the politics. And it turns out that the Treasury was approached by the OBR before the so-called mini budget only a week ago, and they said no thanks. We're gonna, what we'll do is we'll work towards November the 23rd, but these are just the broad outlines. Now that is no way I would put to push a budget. I mean, a lot of us journalists thought that this work had already been done. It wasn't until the OBR actually came out and said, well, actually, they turned us away. I mean, this is extraordinary. So I think there's going to be a lot of stories in the weekend press about this, because this certainly, if I were a news manager, this is what my business news team would be looking at right now. Because as I said to you, All we want to know is the hard facts. We're not stupid. If we look at hard facts and we can see what is actually intended and how we're going to get there, then it's going to be much better for everybody. And at the moment, we actually don't know that. That's what the markets are complaining about.
Okay, Michael, talking about memory. I mean, it's interesting. Yesterday you talked about the OBR. Today again you talked about the OBR. I recall that more than a week ago, before Kwasi Kwarteng presented his emergency medicine pill, I talked about the OBR, and you were a bit skeptical about the OBR. But we're back to that same fiscal plan by the OBR, and which, the IMF is saying, it's inevitable. We must know what the economic outlook is in relation to the proposals by Kwasi Kwarteng. Or maybe I'm misrepresenting it, but I recall that you were skeptical initially, but now you are on this side. However, the lady is not for turning. That's the title in one of the newspapers today. And that sounds very familiar. It looks like Liz Truss remains stubborn, despite the fact that the Tory backbenchers are fighting. They're saying, look, it looks like Liz Truss' prime ministership will be probably the shortest in recent times, and that she will have to go before December. The YouGov polls conducted by the Times is showing Labour consistently in front. How do you think all of this will play out? That's one question. My second question has to do with Giorgia Meloni. Miss Meloni, of the Brothers of Italy party, 44% of the votes in the last elections, majority in the Senate, majority in the Chamber of Deputies. Italy is debt-laden, third largest economy in the Eurozone, and with a lot of crisis, familiar crisis across the Eurozone. What will be the implications for that third largest economy in the Eurozone? Considering the fact that Giorgia Meloni, yes, she's toned down her rhetoric a little bit, but she's still, of course, extreme right, as you have seen. And finally, the pipeline, the Nord Stream pipeline. The Americans are saying they are innocent. This is no sabotage or international terrorism coming from them. The Russians are saying, this is an act of terrorism. This is not from us. Who is to blame? But the Russians have made the point that it's America that stands to benefit. What do you think?
Okay, I think what I prefer to do, as far as Nord Stream is concerned, let the investigations start. And again, that's going to take some time before forensic experts fully understand what's actually happened. And we just may find out, but we're going to get nobody to admit to this in the near future. I'm pretty confident about that, because look how long it took, for example, the shooting down of that particular airliner over airspace and so on. I mean, and they had a black box to work on, and they had the debris on the ground. This territory of fractured pipelines cannot be physically entered until at least a few days from now. And I don't think we're going to get any clear answers to all this. My questions are, yeah, absolutely. Of course, the United States would benefit from it, and it's almost a suicidal burning of bridges by the Russians if they're responsible for this. Why on earth would they want to do this? Because it's actually cutting off one of their levers to turn the screw on countries like Germany in terms of energy costs. I really don't see it. The only interim explanation that I've heard, which I actually would put to you, is that what if it is the Russians, although Putin has been threatening nuclear retaliation after this so-called referendum about the various bits of the oblasts actually coming under the auspices of the Russian Federation. He's saying, look, we've got nuclear weapons, but we can also attack infrastructure if we like as well. And presumably that also means information infrastructure as well. So but I'd prefer to wait until we have some firmer evidence about this. But people are really looking at this very, very closely indeed, not least of which Sweden and Norway, for obvious reasons. You asked about Italy. Again, if I were in charge of a news team, I'd be saying, okay, so what is she actually, what is her attitude towards Russia going to be, and what is her attitude towards the whole of the EU? You quite rightly point out, it is the third largest economy within that particular bloc. And it's very, very important. Its debt to GDP ratio is relatively high. We know that they've had, 70 governments since the end of the Second World War. We know this is the way that Italy goes. If you actually go there, you couldn't go to a more beautiful place and eat more beautiful food and all the rest of it. But unfortunately, that doesn't count for a lot of countries in the world, and that doesn't really count for anything. So those are the two things that I would be wanting to know. One, attitude towards Russia, and two, attitude towards the whole of the EU and the EC framework. And as far as the Tories are concerned, I was watching a Treasury Minister last night on television actually saying, this is a Conservative, saying we are facing a very, very difficult problem at the moment. It may be that Liz Truss is not explaining herself. Certainly the lady is not for turning. I'm going to come on to that in a second, because I know to whom you're referring, and it's obviously Margaret Thatcher and all the rest of it. But what he was saying was, there is really no point. There isn't the time to have another leadership election. I mean, they can't. The rules of the party say that they can't, but the electorate is just going to think, oh no, and the markets would really worry if the Prime Minister and the Chancellor were to go. The markets would just destroy sterling, and the credibility gap that is already getting wider and wider between the United Kingdom and the rest of the world's financial services, I think would get wider still. But what she did, and I think the PR advisor who thought that this would be a good idea was kind of right. But she actually spoke to local radio yesterday, and this is not like the big political interviews. This is actually going out to the country and talking to the people who really care about their listenership. And she did not come out of that very well indeed. So there's a big credibility gap to be overcome.
I mean, I just want to dare her. I dare her to call for snap elections, see if she has the muscle to do it. Thank you so much. For business updates across the African continent, Ruth Sudiri joins us. I'm sure, Ruth, if you want to join me on that day, we dare to call for elections now.
Yeah, she's in a weak position right now. But there, and good morning, Rufai. Good morning, Doctor. Good morning to our viewers. Something Doctor said just struck me a moment ago. He cited the YouGov poll showing that the discontent. Think about the importance of polls, and you had the head of ANAP here on that poll that he talked about that caused a lot of chatter. When can we get that to that level where we have credible polls that we can just cite? Remember, the polls accurately showed that Truss was leading Sunak up until the votes. That's YouGov and the Times. The New York Times has a poll with Siena. The Wall Street Journal has a poll. All these publications. So I keep wondering, when do we get there here? What we have? How do people feel about fuel subsidies? How do people feel about taxation? How do Nigerians feel about inflation? When do we get to that level where we have regular, credible polls that we can cite here without the fear of bias or anything to that level?
You want me to jump on that?
Yeah.
So it's possible, and I'll tell you what happens. The problem is the funds to be able to do it. But how does the polling company get the fund? This is where it's tricky. They need to be able to get the funds from a working economy by businesses commissioning them to do polls so they can have residual cash and now do bigger data sets. The problem with Nigeria is the fact that the big polling companies are here, but they're just working for limited customer base, which are corporates and the likes, and they're not getting enough funds to feed into the bigger companies. And I'll give you an instance. Nielsen is in Nigeria. I'd gone to facilitate the training at their company at some point in time, and you'll be shocked that, why is it Nielsen doing those kind of big polls in Nigeria? But it's because of the fund. So once you get the economy working, you get a lot more corporates that can pull money into these polling companies, and their business can grow. Then they can use their data set for other forms of polling. It's just like advertising. The reason why there's a plummet in advertising revenue is because the economy is not working and we're not getting enough companies and getting ads coming in. So if we can improve the economy in such a way that more companies are doing more polling, local polling companies can get bigger poll, and then they can do more updated poll with a larger sample size. So it's just money. Once the pool of cash comes in, it makes a difference. Because polls are really expensive.
What's your thoughts on polls, as far as us being able to conduct them credibly here?
Well, I hope that we'll get there, but we have the big problem of the Nigerian factor. And what is this Nigerian factor in this regard? Walking to the answer. And that is what the various politicians that we have had on this program have been talking about when the polls do not favor them. In some other environments, it's supposed to be a scientific process of determining the expectations, the position of the people. But here, we turn it upside down. The same way things that work elsewhere do not tend to work here. We are not a data-committed community.
And we're suffering for it.
We don't do planning, governance with data. So when you talk about polling, it's about data. It's about the integrity of data. Do we have the integrity of data here? We don't have it. We don't even know how many we are in terms of population. So it will be, a very high, exceptional expectation to be thinking that, a data-driven process will work in Nigeria. We are not yet at that stage.
So close to elections, that is a big shame. Anyway, really quickly, an opinion piece from Olumide Adesina. He's a financial analyst with Quantum Economics. We've had him on the Global Business Report. It's part of that next gen of young, bright economists and financial analysts coming up. Wrote a piece about something we talked about after the Monetary Policy Committee put forward its, let's go back to that headline. That was in Nairametrics, where he says here that if we take a look at that headline, federal government, that's the fiscal side, not the CBN, has the magic bullet to tame Nigeria's high inflation. Then it quickly goes to the quotes that is in the article. While the CBN has done its part by using its resources, the executive branch of governments in particular is often accused of playing politics and bureaucracy to downplay the significance of such economic decisions. MPC has repeatedly urged the federal government to fulfill its own obligations by addressing infrastructure issues, insecurity, and policy decisions regarding fuel subsidies, among other things, but this has frequently been in vain. I mentioned, for example, the borders and how those were shut and what the impact of inflation would have been. What was the decision making at that point? So that's still along that line. Although at this point, as Doctor, you said, this is a lame duck administration, that we're having this conversation this late in the game tells you all that you need to know. We move to Kenya. Is it Kenya? Yeah, I think it's Kenya. They've hiked their interest rates by about 75 basis points to 8.25%. Remember, inflation is at 8.5. The ceiling for the Central Bank of Kenya is 7.5%, so that exceeds it. Same narrative with pretty much every other central bank.
Cost inflation.
So you have the Central Bank of Kenya, the US Fed, and who else? I think the ECB, all moving by 75 basis points. And then Tanzania and the United Arab Emirates, you're looking at their finance ministers. They're on the left, Dr. Mwigulu Nchemba, finance minister for Tanzania. I see his flag on his tie. And then Mr. Mohammed bin Hadi Al Hussein, a finance minister for the UAE, signing a double taxation MOU to where goods are moving from one side to the other between the two countries. You don't get taxed on both sides, also to improve trade. And also to try to cut down on tax evasion as well. So the UAE signing lots of deals with lots of countries. Tanzania wants to get in there as well.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Doctor.
Okay. Go ahead.
Let me start with the opinion in Nairametrics, which you quoted. What the author of that piece is simply telling us is that when you have a misalignment between monetary policy and fiscal policy, the economy cannot really work. And that there are fiscal issues that drive high inflation. Okay, so whatever it is you do on the monetary side may not work if you don't address the fiscal side of it. And it's this misalignment that we've been complaining about, in the Nigerian economy management space, simply because you find that the CBN does much of the heavyweight lifting. You find a Central Bank of Nigeria that should concern itself basically with monetary policy, at the same time also carrying the fiscal load. So there should be that alignment, which again, instructively, is a key point that is playing out in the United Kingdom at the moment.
Exactly.
When the IMF says, look, by November, this G7 country that is beginning to behave like Nigeria, like one of the developing countries, the third world countries, should have a proper alignment between its monetary policy and its fiscal policy. So it's a no-brainer, whatever it is that essay is suggesting. And what is the essay talking about? That look, for us to get on top of this inflationary crisis that Nigeria faces, Nigeria has to address the problem of infrastructure. Nigeria has to address the issue of insecurity, particularly crude oil theft, and fuel subsidy. Nigeria has to deal with that. Those are not core functions of the CBN. Right. But the CBN, in that analysis, we're being told if those other functions are addressed, then of course, you can have some alignment, okay, shorn of the Nigeria factor. So the view expressed in that regard, I think, is valid. As for Kenya, I think Kenya, the increase is up to about 8.25%, of their, monetary policy rate. Okay, 8.25%, that's after a fashion. We have said most economies are taking cues from the Federal Reserve, the U.S. Federal Reserve. All these countries, their debts, their commitments are dollar-denominated anyway.
Yep, that's right.
So you find after a fashion, countries of the world are going in the same direction. So that's basically what they have done in Kenya, from 7.5% to 8.25%. Will it work in the case of Kenya?
That's the question.
That's the question. And it's the same question we also ask here in Nigeria. The Central Bank of Nigeria has moved from 14% to 15.5%. There is an injection that is promised of 9 trillion naira into the economy. Okay, interest rate for people who still have some small money in the banks has been increased to about 4.25%. I don't know whether that will encourage savings in the face of the fact that inflation, if inflation rises above the value of your savings, you gain nothing, even if they increase interest rate. That's simple economics. Okay, so the question therefore is, will it work? Will it solve the problem? Will the MPC in Kenya, Bank of Kenya, not come back later again and increase it further? These are the questions.
Indeed. You see, government matters, and that's why I beg Nigerians, interrogate ideas of your politicians in 2023.
Preacher, we really do.
Interrogate them.
Lord.
If anything they say they are going to do, ask them how. Government matters. See, inflation was sitting down on its own, We in Nigeria went to meet inflation and say, come on, stand up, come here. That's what we did when we shut down the border.
Just like that. Without consulting anybody.
And somebody was bragging then. The Minister of Agriculture will lock the key and throw it into the water. You can see our lives. And he was bragging. And what was the idea? Oh, we want to support proudly made in Nigerian goods. So the best place was to shut down the border when you don't have prerequisite production to meet up with it.
Demand, and you have...
They will argue with you further that, we reduce our rice bill, the dollar rice bill. Yes, we take that argument. But you also brought up inflation.
You did.
Because you forget that it's not only rice people are eating in Nigeria. You think it's only rice?
Exactly.
It's only rice we're eating Monday afternoon, night? So these are part of the thing. Just like in Kenya too. Inflation was sitting down on its own. A certain Uhuru Kenyatta looked and said, how can I placate the people to win election over this my vice president that I don't like, my deputy president? So, petrol subsidy, increased subsidy. Then inflation started to go up. We used to celebrate Kenya to have good inflation numbers. This was a Kenya that was 5% at a point.
Single digits.
Single digit. But Uhuru looked and said, let me do wuru-wuru. Uhuru did wuru-wuru with subsidy and they're in problem. And that's why, related to that article you talked about, Dr. Abati, he's spot on. Who has put us in all of this bad government decision? Indeed. And that's why you see we keep daring anybody to campaign on this government's record. Go ahead, try it. Because there were just a litany of bad decisions. 2 DIY recessions. Do-it-yourself recessions. DIY. You see, these are the problems we have. That's why leadership matters. And that article was put on. The fiscal side matters a great deal.
Indeed.
The fiscal side matters a great deal. We're saying infrastructure, we've built infrastructure. No security. We built Kaduna rail line. We didn't put the security apparatus in place. People were kidnapped. Now the rail line has been shut.
Right. So
we can't service the money we're supposed to pay on loans as regards that. Nobody's talking about now. It's impacted Lagos Ibadan. The fiscal side now, I'm not sure didn't you hear the story about the Chinese saying they're not putting the money down? Again, all the projects at a point now, we don't even know what's the level of work now being done on the Port Harcourt Makurdi. We're still looking.
Questions.
So please, leadership matters. At least if for anything, learn how we have gone to bring inflation on ourselves by bad decision. Do it yourself. And that's why we need data. Because if you had data extrapolation, you will not make decisions like that.
Indeed.